The morning sun burned hot over Wuse Market, but the rains from the previous night had left behind muddy puddles and clogged gutters. Hawkers hustled, traders shouted prices, and pedestrians navigated the chaotic maze of the market. In the midst of this commotion sat an old man, Papa Richard Okafor, on a wooden stool by the roadside. His clothes were faded, his sandals worn out, his eyes calm. No one would imagine that behind his frail appearance, he was a man of vast wealth residing in a sprawling mansion in Asokoro. He watched people, observing, listening. He wasn't here for money, he was searching for something deeper, a woman of substance worthy of his son, David Okafor, a wealthy tech entrepreneur in Abuja, yet unmarried at 37. Suddenly, a deep growl of an engine disrupted the air. A black G-Wagon sped recklessly through the narrow market road, its glossy body reflecting the morning light. Without caution, it slammed through a puddle, splashing a thick wave of muddy water all over Papa Richard. No, the old man gasped as the cold, dirty water drenched him from head to toe. Around him, traders and passers-by paused in horror. "Hey, look what you did!" a woman shouted after the vehicle. The G-Wagon screeched to a halt just a few meters away. Its tinted windows slid down slowly, and from within a polished voice laced with disdain called out, "Old man, what are you doing sitting by the roadside? This is not your village." Before anyone could reply, the window rolled back up, and the G-Wagon vanished into the bustling road. A heavy silence hung in the air. Someone muttered, "She didn't even say sorry." "Wicked woman," another trader hissed. But Papa Richard simply raised his hand gently and said, "It's okay. Let her go. Let God judge." Little did they know the woman in the G-Wagon was Vanessa Campbell, one of Abuja's socialites, known for her luxury lifestyle, glamorous posts on social media, and her trending catchphrase, "Only the strong walk over the weak." By the time she reached her Maitama residence, she had already uploaded a selfie, captioned with her infamous motto. In no time, comments flooded in. "Slay Queen, Queen of Queens, teach them." To Vanessa, poor people existed only to be stepped on. They were nothing but a blur beneath her tinted windows. But Papa Richard remained seated, drenched but unshaken. His mind, however, wandered beyond the mud on his skin. He thought of his son, David, his only child who had fallen for a woman he barely knew, but whose character Papa Richard suspected was tainted by the very pride he just witnessed. When the market crowd dispersed, the old man stood up, brushing the mud from his clothes. His steps were slow but steady as he made his way back home. He wasn't just returning to Asokoro to clean himself up. He was carrying a story, a message, a test he needed his son to face. As he walked, he whispered to himself, "The true worth of a woman is not in her face, her clothes, or her car, but in her heart, and only eyes that have seen life can truly see that." That day, Papa Richard promised himself he would open his son's eyes, but not with words. He would do it with a test that life itself would set. The evening breeze in Asokoro was cool, the air tinged with the scent of freshly watered gardens. As usual, the Okafor mansion stood majestic and quiet, a testament to years of hard work, investments, and the legacy of Papa Richard Okafor. The gates had barely closed behind the old man when his son's voice echoed from the grand hallway. "Papa, what happened to you? You're soaked and filthy." David Okafor, tall and sharp-featured, hurried toward his father. His brow furrowed with concern, but frustration edged his tone. Papa Richard smiled weakly as he sat on an antique chair, peeling off his drenched sandals. "It's just mud, my son. I'll wash it off." David sighed, visibly upset. "Papa, this is the third time you're coming back like this. I don't understand. Why do you keep going out there, sitting on the roadside with commoners? You have everything here. Why lower yourself like that?" Papa Richard looked up at his son, his eyes soft but filled with gravity. "Because wealth cannot teach you character, my son. Only the streets can show you the true faces people hide." David shook his head. "What are you looking for, Papa?" "A good woman," the old man said simply. "A woman with humility, A woman who will not treat a stranger as less than human. David laughed awkwardly. Papa, we've talked about this. I'm not a boy. I know what I want in a woman. Papa Richard's gaze didn't waver. Who is she? The woman you claim to love? David hesitated, his voice dropping. Her name is Vanessa Campbell. She's smart, beautiful, from a good home. Beautiful, Papa Richard echoed, leaning forward. But does she respect herself? Does she respect others? David's shoulders slumped. She's proud. Sometimes she says things I don't like, especially to people she sees as beneath her. Papa Richard's heart sank, but his face remained calm. And you want to marry pride? David's voice was defensive. She has her flaws, Papa, but she's also sweet when she wants to be. She just believes the world belongs to the strong. The old man nodded slowly. I see. Then bring her here. David looked up, surprised. You want to meet her? Papa Richard smiled faintly. Not just to meet her, David. I want to see her for who she truly is. Bring her here. But don't tell her anything about me. Let her meet me as I am. David chuckled. You want to surprise her? No, my son, Papa Richard replied, his voice deep and steady. I want her to surprise herself. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Papa Richard stood, his frail frame still commanding. David, he said gently, a woman's heart is like water in a pot. You don't know its temperature until you touch it. David swallowed hard, his father's words ringing louder than the silence. Deep down, he knew his father was right. He had seen glimpses of Vanessa's cruelty, but he had turned a blind eye, believing beauty and status could overshadow character. As Papa Richard walked toward his quarters, he whispered to himself, a proud woman may glitter in daylight, but it is in the darkness of the soul that true gold is tested. Meanwhile, in Maitama, Vanessa lounged in her plush apartment, scrolling through her social media feed, laughing at the praise on her latest post. She had no idea that the man she splashed mud on was not just a poor old beggar, but the father of the man she claimed to love. But soon the masks would fall. The heat of midday rested heavily over Jabi Lake Mall, Abuja's bustling haven for the city's wealthy. The marble floors gleamed, luxury cars lined the entrance, and inside the shops, perfumes and designer items created an air of affluence. Outside, near the parking lot, Papa Richard Okafor sat under a tree's shade. His clothes were simple, his slippers dusty, his gray beard unkempt, the perfect image of a forgotten old man. He was watching again, watching life reveal character. Then the familiar roar of a black G-Wagon echoed, pulling up sharply. The door opened, and in stepped out Vanessa Campbell, sunglasses perched on her face, lips pursed, the sway of her designer handbag broadcasting power. She spotted Papa Richard instantly, her expression twisted with disgust. You again, she snapped, storming toward him. Old dirty man, what's your problem? Why do you keep sitting around like this, embarrassing your generation? Papa Richard said nothing. His eyes remained steady, his hands resting gently on his knees. You make this place stink, she continued, her voice sharp, echoing around. You're the reason Nigeria is backwards, sitting like a goat, waiting for pity. Her words pierced the air, and some passers-by paused to watch. Others hurried on, pretending not to hear. Then a soft but firm voice interrupted. That's enough. The crowd turned. A young woman holding 2 bags of groceries stepped forward. Her skin glistened with sweat from the heat, her hair tied back in a simple scarf. Her clothes were plain, but her posture carried dignity. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. And who are you? My name is Maryanne Nwokoye, the woman replied, and you have no right to speak to an elder like that. Vanessa scoffed. Look at you, another poor rat trying to feel important. But Maryanne stood taller. Insult me all you want, but respect this man. He did nothing to you. Vanessa's voice rose. He exists. That's what he did. Poor people shouldn't be seen in public. Maryanne's eyes narrowed. You might have money, but your words are cheap. The crowd murmured. Vanessa's face darkened with rage. But before she could retort, Maryanne added calmly, "Real strength is not in stepping on others. It's in lifting them up. But you wouldn't understand." Vanessa hissed and spat near Papa Richard's feet. "You'll regret this," she said before storming back into her car, music blasting as she sped off. Silence lingered. Then Maryanne turned to Papa Richard and knelt slightly, her voice gentle. "I'm sorry for what she said, Papa. Are you okay?" He looked into her eyes, clear, sincere. He smiled faintly. "Thank you, my daughter." Maryanne sat beside him on the pavement, unbothered by the curious stares. "I can't stand people who look down on others," she said. "It burns me inside." Papa Richard smiled. "Your heart is pure. What is your name again?" "Maryanne Okoye," she answered. "I live in Nyanya. I studied agriculture at University of Abuja, but jobs are scarce. My parents are poor farmers in Kuja village." Papa Richard nodded, listening keenly. "I've been thinking," she continued, her eyes lighting up. "Instead of staying home idle, I can start a small farm behind my compound, maybe even here behind this mall. There's land wasting. I can plant vegetables, okra, pepper, and maybe you can help me. I can't leave you sitting here every day, Papa." Papa Richard stared at her, moved beyond words. This was the kind of woman he had longed to see, not in clothes or makeup, but in character. "You would help me farm?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes, Papa. I may not have much, but I have strength. Together we'll eat fresh food and maybe even sell some." The old man's chest filled with something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Maryanne stood up, adjusting her bags. "I'll come tomorrow morning, Papa. We'll start small. See you, okay?" He nodded. "I'll be here." She smiled, waved, and walked away. Her steps were light, her presence like a breeze after harsh sun. As Papa Richard watched her disappear into the crowd, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "Lord, is she the one? The woman who will bring peace to my son?" Back in his mansion that evening, Papa Richard could not keep the joy from his face. Tomorrow, he decided, he would tell David he had found someone, a woman not rich in money, but in soul. The evening had set a golden glow over Asokoro, casting long shadows over the elegant Okafor mansion. The fountains murmured gently. The air was still, but inside the mansion, there was a spark of excitement brewing. Papa Richard Okafor had just returned, his heart lighter than it had felt in years. His feet, though old, carried the eagerness of a man with newfound treasure. In the expansive living room, David Okafor sat on the couch, immersed in files on his tablet. He glanced up as his father entered. "Papa, you look happy today," David observed, surprised by the unusual brightness in his father's eyes. Papa Richard chuckled softly. "Indeed, my son, because today I met a woman." David's brow lifted. "A woman?" "Yes," Papa Richard said, lowering himself into his favorite chair. "Not the kind you see in magazines or at city parties, but a woman with a heart, clean, kind, and bold." David leaned forward, intrigued. "What happened?" Papa Richard recounted the events of the day, the insults at Jobby Lake Mall, the sharp cruelty of the proud woman, and then, like dawn after darkness, Maryanne Okoye, stepping forward, defending him with strength wrapped in respect. "She sat beside me, David," Papa Richard said, his voice rich with wonder. "She didn't care that I looked poor. She spoke with me, planned with me. She even offered to help me start a small farm in Nyanya, just to keep me from sitting idly." David watched his father's face, noticing how animated he had become, his eyes sparkling with admiration. "She sounds impressive, Papa." "She is. She is the kind of woman a home needs, one that builds peace, not noise." David smiled faintly but shook his head. "But Papa, kindness is rare these days. Are you sure she's genuine?" Papa Richard chuckled knowingly. "That's what I want to find out, but I've seen her eyes, David. There's truth there." He paused, then his eyes settled on his son. "Now tell me, have you spoken to Vanessa about visiting?" David nodded reluctantly. "She agreed. She'll come by this weekend." Good, Papa Richard said, his tone turning firm. But don't tell her who I am. Let her meet me as she sees me, a simple old man. David raised an eyebrow, half amused. You still want to test her, Papa? Not a test, my son. A revelation. I want to see the real woman behind the polish. If she comes in pride, we'll know. David sighed. I hope you're wrong about her, Papa. I want to believe there's more to Vanessa. Papa Richard looked him in the eye. We'll see. But I must warn you, my son, beauty fades, pride destroys, but character lasts longer than wealth. David said nothing, but the words planted themselves deep in his heart. That night, as the city of Abuja glimmered under the watchful stars, two men sat in the same house, one holding the joy of discovering a rare soul, the other caught between desire and doubt. Elsewhere in Maitama, Vanessa tried on new designer outfits, already plotting how she would impress her boyfriend's father. She had no idea that the man she had scorned at the market and the mall would be sitting right there, waiting with quiet eyes and a knowing heart. And in Nyanya, Maryanne watered the little patch of land behind her compound, dreaming of the small farm she would soon build, unaware that her destiny was quietly aligning, piece by piece. Tomorrow would reveal faces. But for now, the game of hearts and character had begun. Saturday morning in Asokoro was peaceful, with the kind of hush that settles before something significant unfolds. Papa Richard Okafor sat in the living room, dressed simply in a clean caftan, his cane resting by his side. The wide windows let in the soft light of dawn, but his mind was alert, waiting. From the hallway, David Okafor stepped in, a mix of nervousness and curiosity in his eyes. Papa, she's on her way, David said quietly. Papa Richard nodded, his face calm but his heart steady with expectation. Let her come as she is. Moments later, the hum of an engine echoed from the driveway. A luxury black G-Wagon rolled in, its glossy body shimmering under the Abuja sun. The door opened with a soft thud, and Vanessa Campbell stepped out, radiating confidence. Her heels clicked on the tile floor, her handbag swinging like a badge of honor. She entered the mansion, her eyes scanning the grandeur with veiled approval. Not bad, she muttered under her breath. Not as modern as my place in Maitama, but it'll do. Then her gaze fell upon the old man sitting quietly in the living room. Her steps faltered, her painted smile faded. Her breath caught in her throat. Papa Richard raised his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers steady, knowing. Vanessa's voice trembled, barely a whisper. You? David looked between them, puzzled. You know each other? Papa Richard's voice was calm but cold. We've met before, twice. David turned to Vanessa. Is this true? Vanessa stammered, her confidence crumbling. I didn't know he was your father. You didn't need to know, Papa Richard replied, standing slowly. All you needed was to show respect. But twice you found me by the roadside and poured your pride on me like poison. David's face tightened, disbelief flickering in his eyes. You insulted him? I thought he was just a beggar, Vanessa snapped, her voice rising in panic. He is a human being, David barked back, his disappointment as sharp. Is that how you treat people who can do nothing for you? Vanessa's eyes glistened with sudden tears. I didn't mean it that way. I'm sorry. But Papa Richard's voice cut through the air, heavy and firm. You are not sorry for what you did. You are sorry for who I turned out to be. The words hung heavy in the room. David stared at Vanessa, the woman he once thought he loved, now standing exposed, not by her wealth, but by the poverty of her character. I thought you were strong, David said bitterly, but you're just loud. Love cannot grow where pride lives. Vanessa reached out to him. Please, don't say that. David shook his head. A woman who disrespects my father, disrespects me, and I won't build my home on such a foundation. Vanessa's shoulders sagged. She turned to Papa Richard, her voice a whisper. Please forgive me, sir. Papa Richard's eyes did not soften. Forgiveness is easy, my dear, but trust Trust must be earned. You had a chance to show your heart, but you showed us your ego. Vanessa's tears fell, but she knew it was over. She picked up her bag, her heels clicking against the floor like echoes of defeat, and left the mansion without another word. The house fell silent. David sat beside his father, his heart heavy. "Papa, I made a mistake." Papa Richard placed a hand gently on his son's shoulder. "It's not too late, my son. A mistake is not the end, but a lesson." David exhaled deeply, his mind swirling with regret and clarity. After a while, he asked softly, "Papa, this girl you told me about, Maryanne, where is she now?" Papa Richard smiled faintly. "She said she'll be at Jobby Lake Mall this afternoon, tending to that little plot of land behind it." David nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe I need to meet her myself." Papa Richard's eyes twinkled, a quiet pride resting in his chest. "Yes, my son, go. The heart sees clearer than the eyes ever will." And as the mansion settled back into calm, both father and son knew that day a mask had fallen, but a door had just opened to something real. The sun rose steadily over Abuja, its rays stretching over the city's quiet neighborhoods. But the suburb of Nyanya stirred with a different kind of life, the hustle of early morning, the chatter of traders, the rhythmic sweep of brooms clearing storefronts. David Okafor, behind the wheel of his black SUV, drove without direction. The morning after Vanessa's disgrace still hung heavy on his mind. The pride, the arrogance, the disrespect, all of it replayed like a stubborn memory. He needed clarity. He needed air. Without realizing it, he found himself on the rougher roads leading to Nyanya, far from the polished world of Asokoro and Maitama. Something in the modest houses, the echo of life lived simply, settled his heart. He parked by a narrow path behind a stretch of local stores. There, under the soft light of the morning sun, he saw her, a young woman bending low, her fingers in the soil, a basket of seeds by her side, a small hoe resting nearby. She wore a simple gown, her hair tied back with a scarf. No makeup, no pretense, just raw humanity. She hummed softly to herself, content in her labor. David watched, captivated. There was a grace in her work, a quiet pride in her purpose. Then she looked up, and their eyes met. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully, brushing dust from her palms. David smiled faintly. "Good morning. I was just passing by." She stood and wiped her hands on her gown. "You're welcome. This is my little farm. I'm still clearing the land." David stepped closer, curious. "You're farming? Here?" "Yes," she replied with a small laugh. "It's not much, but it's better than sitting at home complaining about no jobs." David chuckled softly. "Most people I know wouldn't touch a hoe, let alone start a farm." She smiled warmly. "I'm not most people." David was charmed by her humility. "What's your name?" "Maryanne Nwakoi," she replied, extending her hand. "David," he said, shaking it. Her grip was firm, her gaze direct. They both sat on a nearby rock, watching the morning unfold. "I'm trying to help someone," Maryanne said, her eyes gentle. "An old man I met at Jobby Lake Mall. People treat him like trash, but he's wise. I told him I'd help him plant something here, so he'd have more than just coins from strangers." David's heart skipped. His father had spoken of her. This had to be her. Yet he said nothing, only listened. "You have a good heart," he said softly. Maryanne shrugged. "I don't know about that. I just believe in dignity. Everyone deserves respect, even when they have nothing." They shared a moment of silence. Then she asked, "And you? What do you do?" David hesitated. "Business." Maryanne laughed. "That's every Abuja man's answer." They both chuckled, the air between them light and genuine. David stood after a while. "Can I help? I'd like to learn." She raised an eyebrow, playfully inspecting his clean shoes. "You? With those shoes?" "I can learn," David replied. She smiled, handed him a small hoe. "Let's start with the okra." Together they began, two strangers from two worlds, yet connected by the soil beneath their feet. For the first time in days, David felt peace. Not the peace that money buys, but the kind that comes from simplicity, honesty, and connection. And somewhere in Asokoro, Papa Richard sat by his window, staring into the horizon with a knowing smile. He didn't need to be told. His heart knew that his son had just touched the beginning of something real. Morning dew still clung to the flowers that framed the wide gates of the Okafor mansion in Asokoro. The estate stood as a monument of wealth and legacy, yet inside its walls, a quiet anticipation filled the air. Papa Richard Okafor stood by the window, his eyes tracing the distant hills, his heart waiting. Today was no ordinary day today. The girl he believed to carry peace was coming. Far away in Nyanya, Maryanne Okoye stood before a small, cracked mirror, adjusting her scarf. She stared at the address scribbled on a piece of paper that Papa Richard had given her earlier. She whispered to herself, "A mansion in Asokoro? Surely this must be a mistake." Still, curiosity and respect for the old man pushed her forward. She took the long journey, boarding taxis and okadas, until she arrived at the towering gates of the Okafor estate. The security man glanced at her, skeptical, but after confirming her name, he waved her in. Maryanne walked the marbled driveway, awed by the size of the estate. "This can't be the same man," she whispered. The air smelled of flowers and wealth, a far cry from the dust of Nyanya. As she approached the entrance, footsteps echoed on the polished floor inside. Then she heard a familiar voice. "My daughter, you came." She turned sharply, her eyes widened in shock. "Papa Richard?" she gasped. "You live here?" Papa Richard chuckled gently, his hands clasped behind his back. "Yes, my daughter, this is my home." Maryanne staggered back slightly, her eyes sweeping the opulence around her. But you said you slept in a shop?" "I said that so I could see how people treat those who have nothing," Papa Richard said calmly. "And you, my child, treated me with dignity even when you thought I was poor." Maryanne's heart thudded. She was about to speak when another voice called out from the hallway. "Maryanne?" She turned and froze. It was David, stepping out of the inner room, his eyes wide with recognition and disbelief. "You?" they both exclaimed in unison. "You're the girl from the farm," David said, stepping closer. "You live here?" Maryanne gasped, her voice trembling. Papa Richard watched silently, his eyes twinkling. I had no idea," she stammered. "You're his son?" "Yes," David nodded, a slow smile forming. "And the old man you helped, that was my father." Maryanne's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelm. "I don't understand." Papa Richard stepped forward. "There's nothing to understand, my daughter. Life was watching, and you passed the test without even knowing." Maryanne shook her head, still stunned. "But I didn't do anything special." "You did everything special," David said softly, his voice earnest. "You stood for someone who could offer you nothing, or so you thought." Silence settled between them, thick with emotions unspoken. Papa Richard smiled, then turned to David. "Well, my son, what do you see?" David faced Maryanne, his gaze soft and certain. "I see peace. I see strength. I see the woman I've been searching for." Maryanne's cheeks flushed. She lowered her eyes, unsure of what to say. David continued, his voice firm yet tender. "Maryanne, I didn't plan this. But from the moment I met you at the farm, I felt something different. I want to know you more. I want to build something real with you." She looked up, her voice shaky but sincere. "I want that too, but you must know where I come from. My parents are poor farmers in Kuja village. I'm not from your world." David smiled gently. "That's exactly why you're perfect. Not because of where you come from, but because of who you are." Papa Richard's heart swelled. He watched them, silently thanking God for allowing him to witness this connection, one born not from wealth, but from character. Maryanne wiped a tear from her cheek and chuckled softly. "I guess the farm has grown something after all." David laughed. "Yes, and this is just the beginning." Together they sat with Papa Richard, laughter and light conversation filling the mansion that had long waited for genuine joy. The masks had fallen, and for the first time, Love had entered not through the gates of wealth, but through the door of humility. The morning sun stretched lazily across the plains of Kuja village, casting a golden glow on the fields that had been tilled for decades by worn but dedicated hands. Chickens pecked the dusty ground, children's laughter echoed faintly, and the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke from morning fires. A dusty path stirred as a black SUV rolled gently into the village, its polished exterior contrasting sharply with the rustic simplicity of its surroundings. From the vehicle stepped David Okafor, dressed modestly but with a natural elegance, holding hands with Maryanne Wakoya. They stood before a small, aging mud house surrounded by patches of cassava and maize. Two elderly figures emerged. Mr. and Mrs. Nwokoye, Maryanne's parents, their faces wrinkled but warm with love. Maryanne ran forward, embracing them tightly. "Papa, Mama, I've brought someone special." Her father, wiping his hands on his threadbare wrapper, asked, "My daughter, who is this fine man?" David stepped forward respectfully and knelt slightly, a gesture of humility that surprised the old couple. "Good morning, Sir Ma. My name is David Okafor. I have come to ask for your daughter's hand." The old couple exchanged bewildered glances, then back at their daughter. Maryanne smiled softly. "It's true, Papa. He is Papa Richard's son, the old man I told you about." Understanding dawned on her parents' faces. They smiled, but her mother, ever the cautious one, said, "My son, we have nothing to offer you. We are poor farmers." David looked them in the eye, his voice steady. "You have already given the world the greatest treasure a daughter raised in dignity and kindness. That is wealth enough." Tears welled up in her mother's eyes. "May God bless you, my son." They invited David and Maryanne inside, where the conversation was filled with laughter, stories of village life, and the values of humility and hard work. As the sun climbed higher, David stood outside watching the farmlands, the earth rich but tired, much like the people. Turning to Maryanne's father, he said, "Sir, I want to ask for one more thing, permission to bring you and Mama to the city. Let me relocate you to a home in Asokoro, where you can rest and enjoy the fruits of your labor. No more farming unless you choose to." The old man shook his head in disbelief. "You would do that for us?" David smiled. "Because you raised the woman I will spend my life with, and because I have learned that no matter where we come from, our roots deserve honor." Later that week, back in Asokoro, a quiet celebration was held. It was not a loud party of status, but an intimate gathering of family, friends, and neighbors who had witnessed the transformation of a story birthed in humility. And Papa Richard Okafor stood proudly, watching his son and Maryanne hand in hand, partners not just in love but in purpose. He had begun to farm again, not for survival, but for joy, with Maryanne by his side, sharing knowledge and techniques. One afternoon, under the shade of a mango tree in the mansion's backyard, Papa Richard shared a final lesson with David and Maryanne. "Remember," he said, his voice slow and sure, "a home is not built with money. It is built with respect, humility, and patience. The true worth of a woman is not seen in her beauty or wealth, but in her character when no one is watching." Maryanne rested her head on David's shoulder, a peaceful smile on her face. She had come from Kuja village, but her worth had brought her to the heart of a family that cherished her for who she was, not what she had. As the sun began to set over Abuja, casting a soft amber glow across the land, the family stood together, a portrait of unity, love, and lessons that time could never erase. A poor farmer's daughter had become the heart of a wealthy home, and a father's test had unveiled a woman whose worth no gold could measure. And in the garden of life, it was clear the richest soil was character, and the rarest harvest was love.